So I pasted her in there. Let me make this full screen. And we are going to move her onto her own layer. So we've seen me do this just by making a new layer and locking it, but I wanted to talk about like what if I started drawing on here and then realized that I wanted to have a second layer. Like what if I got a little ways through my beautiful flat. Let's give it a fill. So I started drawing and then I realized that I need to lock this somehow. With this selected, if we look down at our layers panel, I wish I had like a zoom function. Do you know how to do that on Macs? Anyway, this little blue dot, it represents everything that is selected on the page. If I hover over it, it even says indicates selected art. So I can click and drag on that, and I can click and drag it to a different layer. So this, because it's on the bottom layer and I'm moving it to the top layer, it's actually going to pop to the top. So I'm just clicking and dragging this to a different layer. And see, it turned red. It turned red because this guy is red. This little marker next to my layer is red. So anything that's selected on that layer will have that red outline. Did I move them both? I did move them both. So this guy is now on again the same layer with this. So I can just click and drag on this guy and drag him to his own layer. And now he's blue, and when I select this, it's red. So I can just reorder my layers so my template is on the bottom and I can lock it. Another way to get your template kind of in a nice space is to double click on it. Double click on the layer. And remember, whenever we double click, we want to kind of double click in this area where there's no text and no other symbols, right? Otherwise it might activate something. But double click on it, this layer options panel comes up and you can check templates. And it automatically dims your images. So when I hit OK, she'll actually be kind of softer, which is nice for working on top of. Okay, so let me start my real flat. The first thing I want to do is get guides out. How do I get guides, guys? How do I? Yeah. Yes. Exactly. So rulers in Illustrator at least live under view, rulers show rulers, and then if I want a vertical guide, I can click and drag on the vertical ruler and drop it in here. Right now, I still have the option of like moving this guide around, and the way I'm going to show you how to do flats today, my preferred way, not the way that Meg teaches apparently, but I think it's fine. My preferred way, this like being unlocked becomes very problematic. You end up selecting it and then it limits functions because like you have a guide selected, so you can't join the guide to the line that you have selected. Anyway, we just need to lock it. You pretty much always need to lock guides, view guides, lock guides. Another option is to put your guide on the layer that, like your template layer. If you put it on your template layer, then it will be locked. Anyway, you'll figure it out when you run into it and you're like, why can't I do this? And it'll be because of your guides, potentially. So I'm going to zoom in here on the top, and today we're going to make a blouse with a collar, but it starts essentially with our basic t-shirts again. So this time I'm going to start from the center front though, and actually I'm going to make sure before I start drawing that I have a stroke on. So from this center front guide, I am dragging out a flat handle. I'm even holding shift. If you hold shift while you're clicking and dragging out a handle like this, it will snap to the cardinal directions, right? So I can keep it nice and flat, even if I move my shape around. So I'm holding shift and I'm just dragging it out a little bit. A mistake I see a lot of people make is like they would try to drag their handle to this corner points, but we want to drag it out flat. Let me zoom in here. Can you guys see this blue line, or is blue a bad color? Okay. So we're looking for this lightly curved line, and my hand is released right now. So I'm going to click to place a corner there, and click to place one here. Now, there's always the option of converting anchor points. If you are uncomfortable clicking and dragging out handles, if that's confusing to you, you can always just like click, like we learned last class, remember, and then we converted them, right? But I'm gonna click and drag on this so it immediately has a curve like that. And then I'm gonna click on the underarm points. And remember this, this curve, it's important to be able to use this curve for how we complete the flats with the armhole and everything. And it's important for the language of the flat as well that there is a curve there, because that curve is representing like the bell sleeve, the bell shape of the sleeve, you know? If you were wearing a t-shirt where the sleeves were just like flat rectangles sewn on, you might illustrate this with a straight line. We'll talk about that later though. So clicking back down to the bottom, and then I'm going to click to the center and drag to the left. So I'm going to drag out a little curve automatically again, and I'm holding shift so this is nice and flat. And then I'm hitting return to apply that. There's lots of options for like the order of operations on how to do these things, but I think that I will actually illustrate the sleeve and then reflect it all at once so I don't have to do the reflection twice. It doesn't really matter. You could do these things in many different orders. Anyone remember how we made the sleeve last time? No? Just really quick to hit on copying and pasting again. I know I did this last time, but if I draw out a circle, circle-y, squarish thing. If I copy and paste with the black selection tool, what's going to happen, guys? You know.
It'll copy the whole thing.
Yes. Yep. There we go. It copied the whole thing. This is different than copying and pasting with the white selection tool, where if I select an anchor point and copy and paste, it copies and pastes that anchor point, but then also the anchor point on either side of it, okay? Or the line segments on either side of it. If I copy and paste just a line segment, it's kind of hard to tell when a line segment is selected because none of the anchor points highlight like they normally do, but if you're working with a curved line, then these handles show up. It's subtle, but if I copy and paste it, I just copy and paste that line segment. So we're going to utilize that function to grab this line segment from the sleeve. Let me delete all these. Does that make sense, copying and pasting with those two different tools? So if I select this anchor points, how much of this path is going to get copied and pasted? Yes, this much. The whole sleeve is going to, this whole armpit area is going to get copied and pasted. So I can copy and paste, but actually paste isn't what I wanted to do because now this is like over here, and sometimes it's hard to get things lined up again in Illustrator. So instead of that, I am going to go to Edit, Paste in Place. And now it made one on top of it. I can even change the stroke color. So we can then grab our pen tool. And when we hover over the end of this path, what symbol are we looking for next to the pen tool? Like I want to continue this line. Yes, a slash. Yes. Slash. We want a slash. It's very important We don't want it to say plus, we don't want it to say minus, just slash. So, or star, we don't want it star either. Slash, and then we can click and build these guys. When I come back to close my shape, I'm looking for a circle. Kelsey, why do we bother making these closed shapes? What is the point? I wanted to try to illustrate that very quickly, where if we filled this with a color, if I made this, I'm going to move it out of the side. This is my proper one. But if I made this like this, which is very common, start here, click down here, bam, bam, bam. You know, it looks okay. It looks fine. But if I wanted to add fill to it, what would happen? Maybe that's a better color. We get a gap. So this is really limiting if we ever wanted to add color to our flats, which we do. Flats aren't traditionally sent to the factory with color on it, but for our creative process, it's much more fun to do color. So we really want a shape like this, where we've included that line. So I can delete this. Here's a pro tip. This is subtle, but if I select this, I'm going to move this over here, and I want to line it up again without hitting Control Z like a million times. If I hover over this, see it says anchor point right there, or anchor, right next to my mouse. It says anchor. If I click and drag on that anchor point, I'm using the black selection tool. If I come over here, when I hover over this anchor point, my selection tool is going to turn white. So watch. Boop. So that's white. So that means that it's perfectly aligned. So when it's white, I can release, and it's perfectly, those anchor points are perfectly on top of each other. Just a way to get things really well aligned if you have kind of messed up your order of operations. So I'm going to do some detail to the sleeve before I rotate it as well. Before I flip it. Actually, I'll wait. I'll flip it now. Anyone remember how we flipped stuff last class?
Reflection tool.
Yeah, and so the reflection tool, it might be hiding under the rotate tool for you guys. Reflect tool. Where do we click? Does anyone remember?
You click those shapes that you want to reflect in the copy.
So we have to have them selected, and then we need to so you select them with this tool, with the black selection tool, and then you switch to the reflect tool. And if I option click here on anywhere on the center line, I could option click way down here. But as long as I have vertical selected, it will look good. It's important to check preview at this step, because if you accidentally have like angle selected or something, see, it could be doing something totally wild, right? So you always want to make sure to have preview checked and to do vertical. And then you're right, you hit copy. So this looks really good. And I understand why Meg had us do the like join function that she had us do last time, because this looks like a complete, well-made flat, really. It looks fine, except that like if we went to try to adjust these points, it's not actually solid. So we need to do a little bit of editing on it, just really quick. Especially if we wanted to apply any sort of pattern to it or anything like that, having it be a closed joined shape is important. Before I do it over here, I'm going to do it as a little bit of a demo right here. We're going to talk about join and average. So that guy looks good, and we'll draw another half shape. So let's say I have these two shapes and I want to join them into one continuous shape. We know the join function, right? It's you click here and then you hold shift. So we've selected both of those with the white selection tool. And then we can right click join, or I've discovered it lives under objects, path join, object path join. And see how it drew a line in between them? That's not what we want in our flat, right? We don't want it to have an extra line segment right in the center of our shirt. So we're going to select them both, and then we're going to choose right-click average instead. I've stepped back to where these aren't joined. Right-click average, and average is going to put both of these anchor points exactly on top of each other. Right-click average, okay. Now they're exactly on top of each other. We can still tell they're both selected because of these like 4 handles that are visible, if it's a curved line anyway. So now we can right-click join, and this time there will not be, see there's no extra line segments in here. It's just one solid segment. It does have kind of a butt shape going on, like it's a corner. Who remembers how to smooth out a corner? Come on, we did it a whole bunch last class. If I have this selected with the white selection tool, this corner anchor points.
Can you just delete it? I'll just do the whole point.
Yeah, that would delete the whole points.
Should you go talk to the little curvy thing?
Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Callie. So it's up here, convert. And we can convert it back into a corner, or we convert it into a smooth anchor points. If we've converted it into a smooth anchor point, we can always hold Alt and click on the handle and convert it back into a corner. That doesn't matter too much. I'm going to do that again down here, okay? So you select them both, right-click average. They're right on top of each other, right-click join. You'll get used to it. So right here,
Not to ask again,
no.
but couldn't you do half of your whole drawing and then reflect it?
Yeah, for sure.
Like especially like if you were to make like a dress.
Yeah, you could do the whole shape. Adding details on top of half of a dress can sometimes be limiting. Like, it's just, yeah, it's maybe a little bit harder, and then you'll end up with kind of half lines in some places because it'll stop in the middle and you won't want to bother manually joining all those together. But we are actually going to watch a few. I have this great YouTube channel person who, let me go back to today's class, who has these videos on different methods of drawing flats. So her name is So Heidi, and she's awesome at Illustrator. So we're going to watch these, and there might be a method here that works better for you than the method I am teaching. And I use all of these for various things, actually. So with this guy, we just really want to make this a closed shape so that like we could apply various patterns to it or whatever. And also it's easier to work with closed shapes. Like I'm going to have to copy and paste this bodice and raise the neckline to make it a back, okay? So if I can like click one and hold shift and click the other, but sometimes that's hard to do because these anchor points are going to be so close together. So it's a good idea to get used to clicking and dragging out these little selection boxes. So I'm not clicking anywhere on my illustration. I'm clicking like in the background somewhere and then dragging a little box, and now both of them are selected. So we can just do right click average and right click join. And there it is. I'm gonna do the same thing for the bottom. Even though this looks completely closed, this, again, just having 2 anchor points here is just gonna be annoying. It doesn't actually affect how the garment looks exactly, but it would just be annoying to work with. So I'm just gonna right click average and then right click join. And now if I needed to like raise or lower this curve, I could do it super easily. So we're trying to build robust flats that could be like easily adapted into other flats as well, because we don't always want to be starting from scratch, although it's not too hard. Really quick, I'm going to make the back of this. So with this selected, my favorite process is to go to Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste in Back. And then without deselecting, I click on the center front anchor point here, and then click and drag it upwards till it's flat. And I could apply a gray color. I wanted to address selecting anchor points really quick. I've mentioned this to a number of you, but if I have this guy selected, say, and I want to adjust this anchor point up here, so I switch to my white selection tool. If I try and click and drag on this anchor point right now, it's going to move the whole thing, right? I bet you've experienced this. You're like, why, Kelsey, is this not moving just one anchor point? It's because it was selected with the black selection tool, and now you can see that the anchor points are actually all filled in, right? So none of these anchor points are white. Right, guys? Give it a glance up here. Black selection, black anchor point, or blue, filled in though. So we want to click once, and now that one's white, and only this one is blue, filled in, so we can drag it around. Okay, so honestly, I almost always click once and then click and drag anchor points. You really technically only have to do it if something is selected before you're selecting the anchor point, but I just like get into a habit of like clicking and then clicking and dragging. So we can lower and raise the neckline like that. All right, I'm going to make some fancier sleeves. To do this, we're going to use the Pathfinder tools. They live under Window Pathfinder. And we're going to use two of these today. We're going to use the Unite, and we're also going to use Divide. Unite combines closed shapes into one shape, and Divide splits shapes along paths. I'm going to grab the line segment tool. The line segment tool is different than the pen tool because when you're clicking and dragging with the line segment tool, you're making the line. So my mouse is held down right now. I'm drawing the line. And with the divide function, it's very important that your line not be like this inside the shape, or even from edge to edge like that. None of those would divide it properly. It has to go all the way through the shape and be kind of on the outside pretty significantly. And it's going to get trimmed, so don't worry that. Let me delete these. Now, with this selected, I'm going to choose divide in here. So this is the Pathfinder tool. I don't know why they call it Pathfinder, but that's what it is for these united and these kind of Boolean functions here. So when I choose divide, you can see it split this shape in half, right? So I hit undo so you can see it again. I have selected them both and I hit divide. Kelsey, could we not have just drawn a line across this? Why did we use the divide function? What is the point? This allows us to really easily break up shapes into whole shapes. So right now this is grouped. When I click on it, it still selects the whole shape. But just a really quick object ungroup or right click ungroup. And we can now select these separately. So we could choose to put different colors on them. Or we can now manipulate this further. And these are nice closed shapes, right? Like if I move this, it's got lines on all sides. So that's what's really good about divide, is like it breaks shapes up, but keeps them in whole shapes. So now I can also add some fullness to the sleeve, make it kind of blousier. There's a couple ways I could do that, but I'm just going to add an anchor point on either side. And then I'm going to click and drag these anchor points out. And even this, like with the angle of those looks okay, but I always prefer to kind of make things curved. So I'm going to select it and then come up here to convert, and I'm going to make it a curved line, right? So now it's a little bit smoother. Okay, so that's that guy. I'm going to do that again over here really quick. So I'm going to grab the line segment tool and drag a line across. Now you need to have both of them selected, so I'm dragging a little box around both of them to grab them both, or you can click one and hold shift and click the other. And I'm choosing this lower left-hand corner, divide, and it tells you what these functions are if you hover over them. Divide, and it kind of clips off the edge of that line and splits it in half. Now I can't exactly edit these separately super easily. You kind of can, but ungrouping them makes it a bit easier. A lot of these higher level functions end up leaving things in groups. We're going to talk about another one next week that leaves things in groups. And I'm just going to grab my add anchor point tool and make this kind of fuller. Probably smooth it out again. Okay. Now I'm going to make a collar. I have based a lot of this on, in your today's class, these 4 blouse handouts kind of walk you through how to make this, but they are kind of more, I don't know, they aren't exactly how I'm explaining it, but I did follow the basic collar almost exactly. So I'm going to open that up and we can look at it. She basically has us make a rectangle for the back of it and then draw the front of the collar in, and we then unite it with Pathfinder. And it makes this very attractive looking collar in the end. So I'm actually going to grab my rectangle tool. Where does that live? Under the circle tool. And I'm going to start on my upper shoulder anchor points. And I'm going to click and drag out a box. This is going to be the height of the collar, so kind of do your best. Let me get rid of the green on this part. There we go. Maybe even put it back to black. So from here, we're going to grab the pen tool. And actually, before we do anything, she wants us to copy this. So you go to Edit, Copy, and then that just stays in your clipboard for a while. That's how the steps did it anyway. There's a way around it if you do forget to add to copy it. But anyway, we'll get there. So I've copied it. It's on my clipboard. Anyway, I'm grabbing the pen tool and I want to start from this anchor point. But if I click right now, who can tell me what will happen? Anyone? This is subtle. It'll delete it. Yes, because it has a minus next to it. So if I click it right now, it's going to delete that whole anchor point, and that's not what we want. So we want to start a new line, and to do that, I can hold Shift. Okay, so Shift gives me that star next to it, and that's what we want, not the minus sign. We want a star. So I don't have to start lower or anything or off. I can just hold Shift. So hold Shift, come down to the center front, kind of make collar shape. And then we do want to make a closed shape. So I'm coming back up to that anchor point. Actually, I did this, let me hit Command Z to go backwards. And your collar doesn't sit perfectly straight up and down like I was about to illustrate. It sits kind of off of your neck. So I'm actually going to come a little bit further down the shoulder and then come back up. And we're looking for that 0 symbol. We really want that. The circle means it's a closed shape, right? So that looks good. Before we reflect it, we can adjust any anchor points that we don't like. Maybe we want it to go a little bit further down or a little bit less. You can just move these as you like. And then we can reflect it. So I'm going to grab my reflect tool and option click on the center line. And I've made a mistake. I only had one anchor point selected. See that? So we can hit cancel. And I am going to select it with my black selection tool. And then switch to my reflect tool and option click on the center line. Copy. So that actually looks okay. This is a collar, but she does this really nice, elegant collar that I want to work away on. So I am going to select all of these now and choose Unite. That has made this shape. And what she does then is, with her white selection tool, grabs these anchor points and drags them up to the corners here. So you select all of them, and then it's under Pathfinder, and it's this one that looks like 2 squares connected. Each of the little symbols in Pathfinder represents something, like how it works with other shapes. So yeah, I had them all selected, and then you choose Pathfinder. Now I can drag these up here. And then her last step is, or one of, I think she might have another one in there, but paste in back puts that white rectangle back behind there. We could have done it earlier, but that's the idea anyway. She actually then goes on to add anchor points here and here, and she drags them both downward a tiny bit and converts them to smooth so that it has like this tiniest little bit of sag to it, which is nice. But honestly, at this point, this level of detail is maybe beyond some of you, but you might be able to do that. It's cool. So there's all of that, and I'm actually going to draw my buttons, my button plackets in there. Is that what it's called? Where your buttons go on the front of your shirts? I'm going to grab my line segment tool, and somewhere right here, I'll just click and drag downwards so it lines up. And I'm holding shift to make a perfectly straight line. That looks pretty good. Let's make the back of this now like a back view. For each of your 10 flats that are due in this project later on, so next week you have basic outlines due, which are going to be more like the pants I'm going to do in a minute, just like super simple versions of it. And then we're going to go in and we're going to learn how to add all that detail into it. But they are half due next class. Oh, what was I saying? I don't know. Yeah, the back. I like to start a whole new artboard for the back. We haven't done that this semester, but Illustrator does allow you to work on more than one page at once. So I'm going down to the artboard tool, and I'm going up to the control panel and clicking new artboard. And now I can switch back. I like to duplicate the layer of the front that I've been working on, so they'll be on separate layers. So I can duplicate layer 1. I just clicked on the little dot 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 in the layers panel. And then locking layer 1, I can move all this over. And now we can start adapting this into the back look.
Wait, how did you just do that?
Yeah, I made a new artboard. This is the artboard tool, and this little symbol means new artboard. And if you don't mess with much, it'll automatically make an artboard that is the right size, like the same size as the page before it. Then I duplicated this layer. So down here in the layers panel, I'm clicking on this little expand, or like dot, I call it the dot dot dot, but really it's lines. And you can duplicate that layer. And then I locked layer 1 so that I could select it all. I don't know, that's how, yeah, that's one way to do it. You can actually select everything on a layer by clicking on that area where I was discussing the squares that represent everything you have selected. Like I can click right here and have everything on that layer selected. That's an aside though. So we're gonna start removing things that we don't need from this. I don't need my collar. I do need that part of the collar. I don't need these front lines. I don't need this front bodice, and because I made this back bodice a whole shape instead of like just a little sliver of it, it's nice and easy to just delete that. So we're already looking good, like this is the back, but a lot of shirts have yokes, and I just wanted to demonstrate making a yoke, and then we'll talk about doing the sew lines as well, any top stitching, just as a review. So with my line segment tool, I could definitely just draw a line straight across and say that's my yoke, and like that looks okay. But if I draw a big line that goes all the way through, it's at that area, and then I select this line and the back bodice, I can choose divide. And divide will split it up and make it into whole shapes again. So if I wanted to ungroup this, I could then apply a different color or different pattern to the yoke of it. Something like that. I don't know. So I want to add a hemline to the bottom of this. So I'm going to copy and paste this whole bottom line. If I click over here to the right of my anchor points and copy and paste, I'm just going to get a line segment. That should be, oh, excuse me. That should be familiar, the line segment. But if I click on the anchor point, I can copy and paste in place, or Command F, and then bring this up. Who remembers how to make it a dashed line? Come on. Yeah, it's the stroke panel. So I have it out, the stroke panel, and we can check off dashed lines. A good amount of dash is 2 points dash and a 2-point gap for these guys, and it's always good, I'm going to zoom in out so you can see, it's always good to give it this round cap. And actually, stitching lines should almost always be in 1 point. 1 point thickness. So that's that. Any questions on making this blouse?
Is this lesson also recorded?
This is recorded. And you are probably going to find the videos that we watch after break to be very helpful as well. Okay, so really quick, I'm going to do pants and a skirt. These are simpler garments that I'm going to talk about. So back in layers, I prefer to have all of my clothes, all of my flats on their own individual layers. It just makes it much easier to like understand what's going on and keep things controlled. So I'm going to make another layer and lock my earlier layers or turn them off. And I can zoom back in on this dress form. So, pants, pants, pants. We are going to draw the right half, and then we're going to draw the left half. Or we're going to reflect it. You know how it goes. So I'm going to start in the center front. My guideline was on a different layer, so I'm just going to drag out another guide. I could futz with trying to get that guide to this layer, but that really isn't too important. So I'm clicking on the center front. Your waistbands should be straight across. They shouldn't have curve to them. Unlike the neck hole. We need to give her another anchor point on the hip. If we came right down to the ankle, we would obviously be losing the hip. And since she's curvy, I am going to click and drag out a curve. You guys could always just click once there and then convert it. It's always an option. Then I'll click around here. We are actually going to come back up to the crotch, give an anchor point there. Oh, these are all dashed lines. That's weird. And then I'm going to come back up, and we're actually going to make a closed shape. Normally when we did the bodice, let me get rid of the dash on this. When we did the bodice, we left the middle unfinished, right? There is no black line down the middle of the bodice, and then we join the two sides together. Pants have a center front seam, so you don't necessarily have to join the two sides of the pants together in the same way that we join the two sides of the bodice together. If you were illustrating some sort of leggings where like they didn't have a center front seam, you could obviously you could join this together or remove this center front seam in a variety of ways, but we're going to leave it there. It's hard to see it because it's underneath the guide, but there is a black line down the center front. And then before I move on, I guess I'm going to draw in some detail. And this is kind of like Jenna was saying, it's deciding when you want to draw in detail is part of figuring out the order of operations of these things. So an option here is to I'm going to drag out a waistband, and I'm going to use divide to make that into a separate shape. So select this and then select the pants. And under the Pathfinder menu, we can choose divide. And it trimmed that extra long line that I drew to the width of the shape, and it also split these into different shapes. So I could potentially put this, put a different color on the waistband if I wanted to. I'm also going to draw in a pocket. Bam. Beautiful. Selecting all of these, I can then move to my reflect tool and option click on the center line. Make sure it's vertical checked, check preview, make sure it looks good, and then hit copy. And we're kind of all done with our pants. We can add a circle button in. There's a circle tool. Under the rectangle tool, the ellipse tool, if I hold shift, it'll make a perfect circle. And really this level of detail, maybe even not even the pockets or not even the waistband, is what I'm expecting for tonight's homework, okay? So just basic outlines. Okay, so there's my pants, and I'm really quickly gonna do a skirt. So I made a new layer. I'm going to start from the center front again, and this is going to be a nice full skirt. So I am going to make it pretty A-line. I might, like this. Give it a nice long curve. Now I've made this corner is a curve, right? So right now, I'm trying to come back to the center and make a more flat-ish line. but it's not letting me, right? Because this corner is a curve. Right now, if I clicked, it would make this big swoopy line. So there's a couple ways to get around that. I could hold Alt and click and drag on this handle and like adjust it over there. Or if I click on this anchor point, it will remove the handle. So that's pretty subtle. See, there's a handle there and it's affecting my curve and it's making things weird. So I'm going back to this anchor point that I just made and I'm clicking once, and now there's only a handle on the back side of it. And I can come over here and make my straightish line. I'm actually going to click and drag out a curve, but I just didn't want it to be so dramatic over there. Hit enter to end your line. Like the bodice, we are leaving the center seam. There's no center seam. So we are going to leave this open and join it. So I'm going to do that right now. Have it selected. Reflection tool. What click? What do I click? Where do I click with the reflection tool to reflect stuff? Yeah, but what button do I press while I click? Yeah, option click the center front line and hit copy as long as it's reflecting over the center. So really quick, without dwelling on this too much more, we have 2 anchor points here and I want to make them into one. So I'm, without even moving them or anything, I'm just going to click and drag a box around them, right click average or object path average, I think, hit OK, and then right click join. And that waistband is fine. It's more important though that we do it on the bottom here because this is where we're going to add some real fullness to it. So we still have 2 anchor points down there. It's important to keep track of where you like have not closed shapes and close them. Right click average just in case, and then right click join. And there they are. I'm sorry, I'm going to step backwards for 1 second to just discuss another aspect. Let's say I brought this shape down and I left it looking like this, and then I reflected it. Option click on the center. We get this butt shape. This is a pretty common mistake, guys, ending up with this butt shape. It happens when your center anchor points aren't like perfectly, your handles aren't perfectly flat. This butt shape is very common. I even have a whole video, or so Heidi does, but a whole video resource in here on how to get rid of it if you forget after I tell you right now. But we are going to select both anchor points, and we can really tell that there's more than one selected right now because of these double handles that we can see. We are going to choose, right click average or object path average, and then object path join or right click join. And now they're one anchor point, we can tell because there's only two handles, but they aren't smooth, so we just convert it, right? We know how to convert these things to smooth anchor points. So that's how you get rid of that butt shape. And let me just join up here too, because I had not. Right click average, right click join. If you don't do the average, you'll end up with two anchor points there, and it's just annoying. So now down here, I want to add like a lot of like waviness to this, and I could have drawn that in with the pen tool, but there's a really fun way to do it with the add anchor point tool. So I'm going to grab that. It lives under the pen tool, or you can hit the plus button, and I'm going to add 3 or 4 anchor points on either side of this. Then, with my white selection tool, let me zoom in on this. You can see my anchor point, and then you can see my handles. The anchor point is square, the handles are circles. I'm just going to start dragging my handles so they're perpendicular to the line, like this. And you can move them, all counterclockwise, or you can move one counterclockwise, one clockwise. But it just adds this like really beautiful movement to a full skirt. And it's a little bit faster, I think, than trying to illustrate these by hand. I actually want this one to go like that. So, yeah, I have a line segments like this. And I grabbed my add anchor point tool and I added these, you know, spread out across it. Then with my white selection tool, I start adjusting not the anchors, but their handles. So the anchors stay in the same point, and the handles start moving up and down, back and forth to create this movement. Now I can I can draw some fullness lines in. So these are going to be kind of like the movement of the skirt. So with my line segment tool, which we've been using a lot of today, starting at the anchor points or kind of like at the top of the curve, I can just drag these, oops, click and drag these to various heights, you know, varying slightly the angles, all this good stuff. You have to go?
Hi. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Someone's trying to buy my apartment at 5, and I need to go pay $850 before 5.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I don't understand, but it's cool. So that looks good, right?
I'm still not. I did the add anchor points, and then I got the white tool, but the handles aren't coming out.
Select. So if your line was not a curve, there would be no anchor points. If I did that on a straight line, it would just make corner points, not curve points. So you have to start with a curved line.
When drawing the skirt.
Yeah, for that bottom part. Or you could do this, I guess you could do this and then hit convert on all of them, and then it would add the handles.
Oh,
But
got it.
it's probably easier to start with a curve. The last thing is how do we get we'll do that next week, how we get a stitch line along this curve. That'll be something to talk about in details. So we can pause. Do we have any questions on anything?
Actually, I
yeah.
didn't get the Pathfinder tool on the side because I keep going up to the top, like menu bar, but I don't know how to get that little menu on the side.
Window Pathfinder.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Pathfinder is a hard name to remember. My boyfriend plays Dungeons and Dragons and it's called Pathfinder. Like that's how I remember it, but like I don't know. So I'm just drawing a waistband in here. I just drew like a line segment that is longer and wider than the dress, and I'm choosing divide. And then I could choose to apply a different color to this little section if I wanted to, or a different pattern. All right, break. Unless you have other questions. Yeah.
How do you do those like style?
I grabbed the line segment tool, and you just start at the anchor points-ish, maybe you're next to it, depending on how your line looks, and you just click and drag them up to all different sizes. Next week we might talk about like a really efficient way to do that, but I don't even know if some of these time-saving tools can be actually save less time because you have to try to remember how to use them. Any other questions? Cool. Let's take a break until 3:45, okay? Thank you. And let me stop my snag it.